from Texas, Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the adjective as the ultimate questioner. I'll take that with a chuckle. I have to say, I think cryptocurrency and Bitcoin mining provide enormous opportunities. They're creating vast amounts of wealth. They're creating a hedge for people against inflation. Inflation is a growing concern across the country. They're creating entrepreneurs in all 50 states. I'm also particularly proud that my home state of Texas is becoming an oasis for the blockchain community, for Bitcoin miners, for innovators and entrepreneurs in the crypto world. Unfortunately, the one thing that is capable of screwing all of this up is the United States Congress. And I have deep concerns that Congress is already in the process of doing so. As most people watching this hearing know, in the recently passed so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill, there are provisions targeting and inflicting enormous harms on the crypto industry. As originally drafted, the infrastructure package contained a provision that expands the definition of broker to nearly all participants in the cryptocurrency structure, treating them as a financial institution, which means they have to report consumer information to the IRS, even if those participants don't have access to that information. Additionally, the infrastructure bill included language incorporating digital assets into Section 6050I of the Internal Revenue Code, which states that in a broad range of scenarios, any person who receives over $10,000 in digital assets must verify the sender's personal information, including Social Security number, and sign and submit a report to the government within 15 days. And failure to comply results in mandatory fines and can be a felony with up to 5 years in prison. We have seen how crypto poses a threat to totalitarian regimes. For that reason, the Chinese Communist government recently acted to ban Bitcoin mining. And the sad reality of Congress legislating in this matter, I can speak at least for the Senate. I doubt there are 5 members of the United States Senate that could tell you what the hell a Bitcoin is. And legislating is always a messy process, but when it comes to legislating in an area where most members of this body have very little familiarity with the details, it is highly perilous. So, Mr. Van Valkenburg, your testimony has addressed many of these concerns, but can you share what the impact is of the provisions in the bill just signed into law? And in particular address, I have this week introduced standalone legislation that would simply repeal these crypto provisions. And should Congress legislate in this area? Almost certainly, but it should do so after an awful lot of hearings and an awful lot of learning what's going on, and it should do so with an eye to not destroying this industry rather than simply using a machete and letting the consequences fall on the American people.
Thank you, Senator. I strongly agree that the 6050I reporting requirement represents a rather grave threat to personal privacy. In fact, I believe it's in contravention of our Fourth Amendment rights to not have our personal papers searched without a warrant. The Fourth Amendment protects our private papers when we keep them in our homes and when we have them on our persons. The Bank Secrecy Act, which is our Know Your Customer rules and anti-money laundering rules, is constitutional because those reports are filed by third parties, by banks, where the customer voluntarily provides their private information to the third party, and the third party holds it for a legitimate business purpose. The U.S. Supreme Court found that to be constitutional then if the government gets that information without a warrant, which is why the Bank Secrecy Act is constitutional to this day. It's also why the government can go to Google and get your Gmail email history without a warrant. That was a compromise and a reading of the Fourth Amendment that the Supreme Court came up with in 1970 in California Bankers Association versus Schultz and Miller. Now, in the 6050I reporting context, please tell me who the third party is to a two-party transaction where someone receives more than $10,000 worth of Bitcoin. There is no third party, so how can the third party doctrine make a warrant unnecessary for the collection of that very intimate information, the Social Security number.
And let me ask you, if this new legislative provision, particularly if it's enforced aggressively by the Biden Treasury Department and Biden IRS, if it succeeds in decimating the Bitcoin and crypto industry and driving it overseas, is that good or bad for America?
Well, I believe it would be bad. However, I am optimistic. The provision doesn't go into effect until 2024. There are very reasonable and I think strong constitutional arguments to invalidate it before that happens. And I also think a lot of folks in Treasury actually have the right idea about this stuff and would actually agree that some level of privacy protections are important. So I don't think we're on the cusp of apocalypse as of yet.
Well, I hope you're right, and I hope Congress also acts to avoid apocalypse without rolling the dice and seeing if that prediction is right or wrong.
Only appropriate that the ultimate questioner brings up the